All right, what's up, nerds? This is Cam. Today I'm going to keep working on the inventory system for the weapon system that I created. Today we're going to be organizing items that we pick up into different inventories using a type that we give them. So the first thing that I'm going to create is that type. I'm going to do it in a script that I've called inventory enums, and what I'm going to put in here is just all my public enums that I need. So I'm going to start with one called inventory types, and the inventory types that we're going to have just for today is going to be, we'll do one called weapon and one called item. But you can put as many as you want for whatever different inventories that you need. And then I have this other empty class that I've called inventory. And what I'm going to do with an inventory is I'm going to make a public list of mixins mixin base. And this is going to be my, I'll call this my on equip action. So basically I can send in a mixin from my object that I want to be called when you're equipped from this inventory. And that can handle all the logic from there. And the other thing it's going to need is a inventory type. So we can say inventory types, and we'll just give this type is going to be the variable name. And that should be good for now. So then we can pop on my player, and we're just going to make an empty game object here, and we'll call this inventories. And then we can add an inventory, and we'll say this is our weapon inventory, and we can add another one and say this is our item inventory. And then this list will be populated with weapon types, and this will be populated with item types. So then I'm going to need some kind of inventory controller to actually add our type into it. So we can make that here. So I'll just create a new script, and I'll call it inventory controller. Okay, and inventory controller is going to have a list of inventories. And we're going to give it some kind of add function here. So we can say public void add, and then what add is going to need is it's going to need an inventory type and a mixin to add as our equipped mixin. So we'll say mixin base. And then what we can do is we can loop through our inventories here. So we'll just do that in a for loop. Oh, not that. And then what we can check is the type that we've been sent against the type that this inventory is. So we'll say our inventory at i.type. If it's equal to the type we've been sent, then we want to add to this inventory. And to do that, we'll create an add function as well in our inventory. So we'll do a very similar thing here. But all we're going to do right now is just add that mixin. So actually, we'll listen for a mixin here. Will be our parameter. And then we'll add that mixin to our list. And that should work fine here. And then an inventory controller, all we have to do is call that function. And we'll send in our equipped mixin. And that should work fine. Okay, so then now all we have to do is set up the logic to send our proper parameters to this function. And we're going to do that on our rifle. So we can jump into equip logic here. And right now, if you remember, we have on our get key down, we are calling a function we're calling the action function of our input action. And that is equipable, which right now is just setting this bool to true, which is saying that it is equipped. And then our fire logic is listening for that bool, and then it's able to fire. So we're going to change this up, and instead, get key down input is going to call mixin that's going to add ourselves to an inventory. So actually the first thing we have to do is just correct a small error. I forgot to get rid of this input action call here, because we don't want to call input action anymore. We want to call our check and action. So if you remember in input base, we added the check and action to call input action here, just depending on a bool if it's true or not. So that should work fine now. So what I'm going to need here is my inventory mixin. So I'm going to add a mixin here, and I'm going to call it inventory item. So then anything you add inventory item to will be able to be added into an inventory. So we're going to make this a mixin base. And it's going to have an inventory type. And it's going to have an equipped mixin. Sorry, it's a mixin base. So now on our equip logic, we can add inventory item, and then from get key down input, we're going to reference inventory item instead of equipable, and from inventory item, we're going to reference equipable. So I guess, yeah, sorry, I need to make these public here, just so we can reference them in the inspector. And now, so now my equipped mixin will be equipable, and then we'll call that from our inventory when we are equipping this item, and that will turn the fire logic on. And then the inventory type is going to be weapons, so that's going to work fine. And now the last thing we need is our action function here, which is going to be called when you click that that input key space, I believe. Yeah, so when you click space here, this action function is going to get called. And basically, we want this action to add our equipped mixin and our inventory type to our inventory controller. But to do that, we have to find a reference to our inventory controller. If you're doing a single player game, you could do something with like a singleton, just to always have a reference to your player type. But we're going to do something that's a little more dynamic for now, so you can do it with multiple players. And what we're going to do is add this player to a data type when he is able to interact with this object. So we can make a new data type here, and we'll call it game object data. And in game object data, we can, well, it's going to work very similar to our bool data, so I'm just going to copy this over. All it does is it stores a game object instead of a bool, and then you can get the game object, or you can set the game object, and that'll work fine. So now our inventory item is going to have a reference to a game object data, and it's going to be populated with our player. And then what we're going to say on action, we're going to say player.getData, and we'll use this game object that's being returned to look for an inventory controller. So we can say get component, and we'll look for an inventory controller. Inventory controller, and we'll assign it to a temporary variable. So we'll say inventory controller, and then we'll check if we got one. So if we have found an inventory controller, then we're going to call add on it, and we have to send in a type and an equipped mixin. So the type is going to be inventory type, and the equipped mixin is going to be equipped mixin. And that should work fine. So now all we have to do is assign our data field with the player game object. And we already have a function being called on our equip logic here from our player controller when he enters from this on trigger enter. So I'm actually just going to add multiple overrides to this, and I'll say I'm going to send in the game object, and then on set active here in my interactable mixin, I'm going to just have one that accepts a game object as well, and I'll call this player, and then I'm going to say I'm setting my data to be the bool I get, but I also want to set my game object to be the game object I get. So this is going to be a game object data, and we'll just call it player. We'll call it player data, and then we're going to say player data set data, and it's going to be set with the player that we've received. So now the player is sending in a reference to his own game object, and interactable is setting our player data to have a reference to that. And then our inventory controller is using that, or sorry, not our inventory item, is using that to find our inventory controller and add itself. So it's a bit of a roundabout way, but it works fine for now. So we'll add a game object data here to equip logic, and then we just have to reference it from our inventory item and our interactable. So that should all work fine there. And let's give it a play and see how it works. So if I pop in here and click space, if I pop onto my inventories, it actually didn't work. And that's probably because I forgot to add the inventory controller to the player. So we're going to go and add an inventory controller here. And also we're going to add our inventories to that. So if I pop onto inventories, I can create another inspector tab here. I'm just going to drag it to the bottom half, and then I'm going to lock it. So when I return to my player, my inspector stays here, and then I can drag both my inventories easily onto my controller. So there's my weapon inventory, and here's my item inventory. And now when I pop in here and click space, if you look at my weapon inventory, it now has a reference to equip logic of this rifle. And that's perfect. That's exactly what we want. And obviously there's other logic we need to do. We need to like set this to not be active anymore and put it as a child in the proper location. We'll get to that in the next video, I think. Just to show, I'll just show off what you can do with like multiple inventory types. So I'll just create like an item. We'll call it like a helmet, and I'll give it a mesh here, and I will make a beautiful helmet. There you go. Or sorry, I didn't want to move that. I'm going to move this. And then I can really just copy the equip logic because it's working exactly the same way right onto the helmet. And the only thing that I'm going to change is I'm just going to, oh no, sorry, I'm going to leave that as space. I'm going to change this to item, and then this, I'll give it its own bool data. It's not going to do anything right now, but that's fine. I mean, equipped isn't even being called right now the way we have this set up, so that's totally fine. My box collider is in the middle of nowhere. There we go. So now, if I pop into my helmet and add that, I get my helmet in my item inventory, and I get my weapon in my weapon inventory. So that's kind of nice. You can just set any item in your game to an inventory type, and it'll automatically add it right into that inventory. Like I was saying, the next we'll handle the rest of the like equipping logic and adding into the inventory in the next video, and then we'll work on some UI to actually like nicely equip items from your inventory into inventory slots, and we'll see how it goes from there. But I hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching.